After finishing Adolescence, I was struck by the sheer complexity and relevance of the series. But looking at the mainstream reviews, it became painfully obvious how completely the critics misunderstood the concept. Everyone was busy pointing fingers at the manosphere and so-called alpha male influences, entirely ignoring the actual root of the problem. No one bothered to ask the most important question: why are young men so angry and anxious in the first place? In this video essay, I'm going to explore the true cause of this modern crisis. I will discuss how an entire generation is being taken advantage of, and why Jamie, the antagonist of the series, is actually the Raskolnikov of the modern capitalist world. To start off, we must establish the parallels between Adolescence and Dostoevsky's masterpiece. To understand the modern series, we first have to look at the opening concepts of crime and punishment. Rodion Raskolnikov is a highly intelligent but deeply alienated young man. Plagued by extreme poverty, sickness, and misery, he becomes entirely consumed by the most dangerous intellectual trend of his era, the great man theory. He convinces himself that history's greats possess a moral right to step over the law and destroy others simply because they feel no shame or guilt. Unable to find his place in the world, and desperate to force his destiny to manifest, Raskolnikov decides to commit a murder simply to prove to himself that he is extraordinary. He targets a local pawnbroker who in his eyes embodies the greed, exploitation, and ignorance of the ruthless capitalistic order. In the series, Jamie is a young English student charged with the murder of his classmate Katie. The story opens with a brutal and chaotic arrest, immediately plunging us into the claustrophobic reality of a police investigation. Seeing the immense emotional toll on him and his family, we began to feel a profound sympathy for this terrified young boy. But at the end of the first episode, that illusion shatters. A piece of grainy street camera footage reveals the terrifying truth. He actually did it. Just like Raskolnikov, we watch Jamie buckle under the immense psychological weight of his guilt and his total alienation from society. More than a century has passed, yet the temptation of the Übermensch has evolved and remains just as lethal, luring Jamie into the worst act imaginable. As the shiny promise of the modern life peels away, we are left to answer the darkest question of the series. What exactly pushed a 13-year-old boy to become a murderer? To understand the motive, we must examine the greatest epidemic of the modern era: total isolation. Despite Silicon's Valley promise of a hyper-connected utopia, we have never been more lonely, anxious, or suicidal. We often treat isolation as the disease, but it is merely a symptom, the consequence of a massive collective loss of identity. From national identity down to the nuclear family, the traditional pillars of meaning have collapsed. We are left floating in the void, entirely unsure of who we are or where we belong. Politicians defend the status quo by claiming life has never been more convenient, yet the modern generation is crushed by the economic machine, working incomprehensibly more than previous generations. With parents often absent and exhausted, children are left to raise themselves. Lacking the framework for genuine human connection, they retreat into the digital world, consuming uncontrolled, hyper-stimulating content, even extreme violence and pornography. Because the human brain cannot handle this constant digital simulation, cognitive overload sets in. These adolescents, especially young men, distance themselves from their families and peers, spiraling deeper into addiction and deteriorating mental health. It is the exact same despair that poisoned 19th century Russia. The peasant class, making up 80% of the population, was overworked and entirely hopeless. They either drank themselves to death or they surrendered to radical ideologies that promised them salvation, violent nationalism or communism. Now that we understand the depth of this modern crisis, we must ask, what artificial salvation does the modern world offer to these boys to escape their hopelessness? One of the most disturbing realities revealed by social psychology is that human beings are inherently conformists. We reflect the ideas around us. Because of this, we must acknowledge that culture plays a far greater role in our everyday decisions than we would like to confess. Today, the ultimate machine of conditioning is a digital algorithm. During adolescence, it is nearly impossible to escape mainstream trends due to the sheer, crushing force of peer pressure. In this environment, lost young men discover influencers who brand themselves as the ultimate winners of society. These figures, wealthy and confident on the surface, preach that money and status are the only solutions. They push the destructive idea that women are merely commodities, only desire men with resources, completely erasing the concept of genuine romantic connection. They funnel their desperate followers into Ponzi schemes and expensive courses, hiding the ugly truth. The followers are left fighting for the crumbs, while the architects feast on their insecurities. But even those who don't buy the courses still buy the ideology. In Crime and Punishment, it is Porfiry, the brilliant chief investigator, who methodically deconstructs Raskolnikov's delusion of grandeur. In Adolescence, it is Bryony, a child psychologist, who slowly peels back the layers of Jamie's ego, revealing to us and to Jamie himself the terrifying truth behind the murder. We discover that in Jamie's mind, he was rejected by girls solely because of his looks and his lack of status. This perceived humiliation fueled a deep, venomous anger towards Katie, unable to accept his reality and desperate to demand the respect he felt he was owed. He committed the ultimate assertion of power. He took her life. Because of this psychological pipeline, it is entirely understandable why mainstream figures attacked online personalities like Andrew Tate, dressing them up as the ultimate scapegoats. And on the surface, the critics seem to have won. The leaders of the manosphere have been deplatformed, losing their massive viewership and cultural stranglehold. But their disappearance should not fool anyone. The influences may have vanished, but the anger hasn't dissipated at all. The young men who felt discarded by this culture of hyper-performance did not give up on their revenge. They simply shifted their focus. They are becoming rapidly and deeply radicalized politically, and unlike online business cults, real-world movements are infinitely more dangerous, offering a far more intoxicating sense of belonging. While the current political and economic landscape is terrifying, Dostoevsky left us a blueprint for redemption, a way to salvage our humanity in a profoundly soulless world. In the epilogue of Crime and Punishment, Raskolnikov is sentenced to a Siberian labor camp, enduring extreme psychological and physical agony. Yet Sonia, driven by pure devotion, follows him into exile to support him. Ultimately, Raskolnikov embraces his fate and his punishment. He surrenders his toxic ideologies and eventually chooses the quiet, redeeming power of love and hope. Jamie mirrors the exact same submission. In one of the most moving scenes of the series, he calls his parents to tell them he is going to plead guilty. And much like Sonia, Jamie's parents refuse to abandon him. In the final scene, as they break down in tears, the crushing reality of their lives finally catches up to them. They realize that their son has made his own definitive, horrific choice. He is no longer just a byproduct of their parenting. Yet, they refuse to let him step into the dark alone, because beneath the horror of his actions, he is still their son. Adolescence is a brutal but necessary masterpiece. It is a raw exposure of parental responsibility and a brilliant display of the complexity of human connection. It serves as a harsh reminder for us all to be critical of the artificial forces of the modern world, to learn how to accept ourselves, and above all, to seek the company of others not on the basis of shared hatred, but of mutual love.